A single American soldier is about to face more than 20 enemy troops, alone in the dark with just 3 bullets left. It is 2 a.m. May 15, 1918 in the Argonne Forest in France. He is 5'4", 130 pounds, and before the war he carried luggage at a train station in Albany, New York. Now he stands at a forward outpost on the Western Front. Beside him, another sentry is already badly wounded, barely conscious. And moving silently through the trees, a German raiding party is closing in. There is no reinforcement coming, no artillery support, no escape route that makes sense, and no reason this position should still be held in the next hour. But it will be, because of what this man is about to do. His name is Henry Johnson, and everything about this moment should have ended differently. To understand how a man like this ends up in a place like this, you have to step backward. Not just into his life but into the world that shaped him. Henry Johnson was born in the American South around 1892 and later moved north to Albany, New York. Like many Black Americans of his time, the move was not a transformation of opportunity, it was a search for slightly less limitation. He worked wherever work existed. Chauffeur, laborer, soda counter attendant, eventually a railroad porter. A red cap at Union Station carrying bags for travelers who rarely looked him in the eye. It was steady work, not respected work, just available work. He showed up anyway, because that was what life required of him. When the United States entered the First World War in 1917, everything shifted on paper but not in reality. The country needed soldiers, but it still did not see all men as equal candidates for combat. Black soldiers were assigned to labor units, supply work, construction, menial tasks behind the front lines. The message was unspoken but clear: support the war but do not fight it. Henry Johnson did not argue with that system. He enlisted. He was assigned to the 369th Infantry Regiment, an all-black unit later known as the Harlem Hellfighters. They trained in America under restrictions that limited what people believed they could become. Then they were sent to France, and everything changed. The French army did not have the luxury of segregation policy debates. By 1918 they were exhausted. Entire units had been destroyed over years of trench warfare. They needed soldiers, not categories. So the 369th Infantry was transferred to French command. They were given French rifles, French equipment, and something they had not been given by their own country: a chance to fight. They were sent into the front lines of the Western Front, where survival was measured in hours, not days. For 191 consecutive days, they held positions in trenches without losing ground or captured soldiers. Enemy troops began to call them something out of respect mixed with fear: the Harlem Hellfighters. But none of that mattered on the night of May 15, 1918, because reputation does not help you in the dark. Only decisions do. That night, Henry Johnson and Private Needham Roberts were stationed at a forward listening post. Their job was simple in theory: detect enemy movement before it reached the main line. In practice, it meant waiting in silence while trying to hear danger before it arrived. And that danger was already moving. A German raiding party, likely between a dozen and 30 men depending on accounts, was advancing through the forest. Their mission was not conquest. It was capture. Take prisoners. Gather intelligence. Disrupt morale. They had done it before. They expected to do it again. The attack began without warning. Grenades exploded in the darkness. The ground shook. Splinters of wood and soil tore through the outpost. Private Roberts was hit immediately, thrown into the ground and badly wounded. Johnson was injured as well, but not enough to stop him. Not yet. Rifles fired from all directions. The forest lit briefly with muzzle flashes, then went dark again. And then came the advance. German soldiers pushing forward, expecting resistance to collapse. But it didn't, because Henry Johnson was still standing. He fired his rifle. One shot, then another, then a third, and then it was empty. In most battles, that would have been the end of the story. A man without ammunition, outnumbered, wounded, surrounded. But Johnson did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. He saw 2 German soldiers dragging the wounded Roberts toward the trees. Prisoners were valuable. They meant intelligence. Johnson ran toward them. He used his rifle as a club, striking hard enough to break their hold, enough to force them back. Roberts fell free. That should have been the end of his role in the fight. It wasn't, because more soldiers were coming. From both sides now. And the forest was no longer just dark. It was full. This is where most men would have broken. Instead, Johnson drew his knife. A bolo knife. Heavy. designed for cutting vegetation, not fighting men, not something built for war. But it was what he had, and he used it like it was enough. What followed was not a clean engagement. There is no clean version of what happens when a single man is surrounded in the dark by multiple attackers. There is movement, impact, chaos, close-range struggle where training matters less than instinct. Johnson moved through them, not like a soldier executing a plan, like a man refusing to disappear. The German raid began to slow, then fracture, then hesitate, because something was not matching their expectations. There were supposed to be fewer defenders here. There was supposed to be control. Instead, there was resistance that would not stop. And resistance that would not stop becomes something else in the mind of an attacking force. It becomes uncertainty. In warfare, uncertainty spreads faster than bullets. From their position in the trees, the German soldiers could not clearly assess what they were facing. The darkness distorted scale. Every flash of movement suggested more defenders than there actually were. Johnson kept moving, kept striking, kept holding the line that was supposed to collapse. At some point, the raid stopped being an attack and started becoming survival. The Germans began pulling back, not because they were defeated in numbers, but because they could not clearly understand what they were fighting anymore. And in war, what you cannot understand becomes dangerous in a way that numbers alone cannot explain. The raid broke and retreated into the forest. When French forces arrived later, they found a scene that did not match a single-man defense. Weapons scattered, blood trails, signs of sustained close combat across multiple positions. And Henry Johnson still standing. He had been wounded repeatedly. 21 injuries in total by later medical accounts. He did not collapse immediately. He did not lose consciousness in the moment. He simply remained at his post until the threat was gone. Then the world caught up to him. The French military awarded him the Croix de Guerre, one of its highest honors for bravery. The citation described extraordinary courage under overwhelming conditions. News of the raid spread quickly through military channels and into newspapers. The story reached the United States in fragments, then in full accounts. A black American soldier, alone, outnumbered, holding a position against a German raiding force and forcing it to retreat. Some called him a hero. Some called him unbelievable. Theodore Roosevelt reportedly named him among the bravest Americans of the war. For a moment his name traveled. Then it stopped. When Henry Johnson returned to the United States, he did not return to recognition that matched what he had done. There were acknowledgments, brief attention, local praise, but not institutional permanence. His injuries made physical work difficult. His opportunities narrowed. The war that had briefly elevated him did not translate into lasting stability. And over time, the story faded from public memory, not because it was disproven, but because it was inconvenient to keep present. He died in 1929, still relatively young, still carrying the long aftermath of wounds that never fully healed. And for decades after, his name was rarely mentioned outside historical records. It would take nearly a century for that to change. Military historians revisited records. French citations were re-examined. Eyewitness accounts were compared. The consistency of the evidence left no real ambiguity about what had happened in that forest in 1918. The recognition process began slowly. A Purple Heart. Later a Distinguished Service Cross. Eventually, full acknowledgement of valor at the highest level. In 2015, Henry Johnson was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. Long after his death. Long after the people who knew him had passed on. The ceremony did not change what he did. It only changed how late the world admitted it. There is something about this story that resists simplification. It is not just about bravery. It is about what happens when courage is recorded faster in one country than it is recognized in another. It is about a man who was trained by necessity rather than instruction, and who acted in a moment where hesitation would have meant disappearance. But most of all, it is about how history decides what to carry forward. Henry Johnson did not set out to become a symbol. He set out to survive a night in the forest. And when survival became impossible without resistance, he resisted. Not for recognition, not for legacy, but because there was no other option available to him in that moment. And that is where the story ends. Not with celebration, but with a delay. A delay between action and acknowledgement that lasted nearly a century. A delay that raises a question the story does not answer out loud. How many others were never recorded at all? And how many moments like that night in the Argonne Forest disappeared into silence simply because no one came back later to ask what happened in the dark?